afternoon. I'm really excited to see all of you here for what promises to be a really interesting conversation. My name is Ed Lazere, and I'm the director of the DC Fiscal Policy Institute. And we're holding this event as part of the celebration of DCFPI's 15th anniversary. So we see this as a chance to look back on, highlight some of the issues we've worked on over the years and that we're still working on today. As many of you know, it's been my pleasure and privilege to lead the DC Fiscal Policy Institute since its beginning. It's a real honor for me to be able to get up to go to work every day, to be doing things to try to make my adopted hometown, the place where I got married and raised my family, to try to make it a more humane place and a city where everyone can thrive. And I'm proud of what we've accomplished. As you all know, DCFPI does research to try to identify the challenges facing low-income residents. And then we work with groups like you all, individuals and organizations, to try to make changes to the city's budget or policies to address those challenges. For example, our work has helped define the city's affordable housing crisis and created a sense of urgency needed to address it. Our other successes including getting more resources to high-poverty schools in the city's budget, and then making sure the money actually gets to those schools. And we've been at the forefront of creating the largest earned income tax credit for the working poor in the nation, putting thousands of dollars into the pockets of low-income working families every year. Beyond that, I feel really grateful that the work that we do is often of use to you all, whether you're a reporter scrambling for a fact for a story, or a nonprofit ally who's trying to understand something in the budget and win something in the budget, or a social service provider who's trying to explain to your donors and your supporters the challenges facing low-income residents. The topic today is from a paper that I remember well from the first year of the DC Fiscal Policy Institute in 2001, entitled Envisioning a Future Washington by Alice Rivlin and Carol O'Clair-Tan. That paper imagined what at that point seemed like an impossible goal of increasing the city's population by 100,000 after decades of a declining population. But that goal actually was achieved last year in DCFPI's 15th anniversary. So we are incredibly fortunate. Oh, I didn't say that wrong. I did say that wrong.
You did.
Cut the tape there. We are incredibly fortunate to have Alice Rivlin and Mayor Williams, who embraced the goal that Alice and Carol set, to lead us in the conversation, along with DC reporter Tom Sherwood, to take us a little bit down memory lane, to talk about the goals that were set then and what actually happened, but more importantly, to talk about the lessons learned about what's happened in the past 15 years and what we should be doing going forward as the city continues to grow. Because we all know that the city has changed a lot in the past 15 years as the population has grown. Neighborhoods across the city have transformed with more housing, more restaurants, and other amenities. There's been a huge investment to improve DC's public schools, and school enrollment has actually increased, not only in charter schools, but more recently in DC public schools as well. But of course, the progress has been uneven, and there have been downsides. Some DC residents, including many Black residents born and raised here, have been the victims of rather than the beneficiaries of development. We have not made enough progress to build affordable housing. We've not done enough to help low-income students succeed in school. We're not doing enough to improve job training for adults. And income inequality has gotten worse, not better. And these are the issues that motivate me and my staff at the DC Fiscal Policy Institute every day. So before we get started, I want to once again thank Mayor Williams and Alice Rivlin and Tom Sherwood for their leadership, in addition for being here today. So I remember in 2001 when Mayor Williams proposed creating a dedicated funding stream for the Housing Production Trust Fund. And today that is the largest source of affordable housing funding in the city. I remember when Alice chaired a housing task force in 2006 that recommended creating a new rental assistance program in the city, and DCFPI and its allies quickly ran to the council and said, let's create that program, and it happened, and it's now in place. And Tom, I just wanted to be clear, I invited you here with the hopes that you will now start putting more of our stuff on TV.
Not unless there's a stabbing or a shooting.
All right. There's no blood in our report, unfortunately. Anyway, and just finally, I just want to thank all of you all for being here. You are the friends and colleagues of the DC Fiscal Policy Institute, people that we work with every day, the people who support us financially to make it all possible. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your commitment to DC. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom to lead the conversation.
Thank you, Ed, first. And I like to tell people, if you get an email from me, you see at the bottom of every email you got from me, local Washington is only as good as the people active in it. And I'm sorry you people are not active in it. If you want to move over here, there are seats. Oh, then hell with you. But it's great for you to be here. Thank you not only to the distinguished panelists who are here, but for you being here tonight. Mayor Williams, you'll be relieved there's no opening statement. Like you've given 1,001 opening statements at the candidate forums, you don't have to give one tonight. And we're going to talk a little bit later with Ms. Rivlin about the city and Congress, and Paul Ryan, who the Speaker of the House, who today said he will in fact vote for Donald Trump. So everything about the city is going to be taken care of next January 20th. No one said, did you say silence your phones?
I didn't. I'll let you shut up.
Don't.
Oh.
Here's the policy. You don't have to silence your phone, but if it rings, you have to put it on speaker. So we'll know who's calling you. So let's get started. This is a conversation. We'll look at where we were, where we are, where we're going. And after some conversation, we'll take some questions and comments. If you will step over here, this column next to Greg McCarthy, he'll be giving out free baseball tickets. And please, if you ask a question, we can do without a preamble. But let's get started. Mr. Mayor, in your second inaugural address, and I actually found my notes for it.
I'm impressed you took notes in my inaugural address.
I just did some underlining. In January 2003 at the Warner Theater, you said we can develop at least 15,000 new homes as part of our goal to bring 100,000 residents to the city within 10 years. We must lure back residents who fled the city in the past, but not at the expense of those who today call the district home. We can do this. We can do it for everybody. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. That last sentence was an ad lib because it wasn't in the notes. Ms. Rivlin, in the 2001 report, Envisioning the Future of Washington, you and co-author Carol O'Claracan, Carrick, had written specifically about 100,000 new residents, half families with children, half single adults, who would add vibrancy and economic development without straining social service resources, basically make the city healthier and wealthier. So a question to you both. Where did the 100,000 figure come from? Why 100,000, not 110, 95?
I made it up. And I distinctly remember where I made it up. I was standing in the office of Richard Montag, who some of you may remember was running DHCD at the time. And we were standing in his office and looking out at a lot of vacant property. I said, Richard, would 100,000 people be too, an increase in the population be too much for DC? And he thought for a minute and said no. And I thought, well, that's a nice round number. And at some point, I went to Tony and said, what do you think of that? And he said, well, it sounds like a good goal. It was no more researched than that.
Well, we've made news already. Mr. Mayor, you said 100,000. Did you get it from?
Yeah, I did. And I got to tell everybody, I have a huge amount, continue to have a huge amount of respect. I'm the president of the local Alice Rivlin fan club because, you know, her reputation preceded her. When I was a student at the Kennedy School, we all read about how Alice had created the Federal Budget Act and the Congressional Budget Office. It's hard to imagine we didn't have a budget office. And then, then comes the Clinton administration. She ran OMB. I mean, how'd the budget work out in the Clinton administration? Pretty good. Federal Reserve. So a huge amount of respect for created the control board apparatus and got us out of all that. So, when Alice Rivlin comes to your office and says, we're thinking about a revitalization strategy, targeting a goal that's going to help really prop up the income tax in the district, and indirectly other revenue base, and help us do the things that we need to do. And we haven't gotten to our destination yet, but at least get started on that. If you're Tony Williams, you listen. And I think our people listened because I think she has that kind of courage and respect among our people in DC too. She's a tremendous, there's advertisement, tremendous asset for DC.
Well, I want to follow up with a personal question about that. Why is with all that you just have done in your career and all that he just said, why is it that you decided this little city of Washington was something you wanted? I think you're from Philadelphia. You grew up in Indiana. Is that right?
Well, right, but I've lived in the district since most of the people in this audience were born.
But there are many people who live in this city and see it only as a way station, even if they stay
Yep.
here 50 years. So what was it about the local city that turned your attention?
Well, I liked living here, and I have lived here continuously since 1957, but I also spent a couple of my teenage years, because of my father's war work, here in Washington. So I have a long Washington attachment. And long before the days of the control board, about which more later, I was very interested in how could I help my hometown. And the late Marion Barry actually asked me to do several things, and I got into doing them and chaired a commission on the finances of the city, which actually wasn't paid much attention to initially, but Tony did. And I want to make clear that the fan club is very mutual here. So I think this is the nation's capital. It's an important city. It's a city with enormous potential, some of which is being realized, some of which isn't. So I'm committed to this.
One of the things I learned in looking up some research for tonight is that when you did some reports in the early 90s when Sharon Pratt Kelly was Sharon Pratt Dixon at the time was elected mayor, that you offered to be the CFO. Is that true? I had never read that before.
I floated the idea.
And like many things in that administration, it sank.
Nothing happened.
Out of sight, out of mind. Okay. I think it's important to see some of the personality of the people who have done a lot of the work that we're talking about tonight, because a lot happens as they're just trying to get things done. And I'm always glad to hear little nuggets like she could have been your predecessor.
That's true. She could have been mayor.
And then
She would have been a great mayor.
and then you would have never been.
There you go. And a lot of people, I'm sure, are happy about that.
Well, we'll take a poll later. Let's talk about something seriously about this, though. It's Ms. Rivlin, your 2001 report also envisioned a city in 2010 whose racial makeup would not have, quote, shifted radically. Of course, we all know now the African-American population now is slightly below 50%, a steady decline that continues. Now, I was called a couple of years ago by a New York magazine that was asking about conspiracy theories, and the reporter wanted to ask me about the plan. Everyone here know what the plan is?
Oh, yes.
It was the conspiracy to take, the white people were going to take the city back. And I told the reporter, and I was quoted as saying, I don't know if there was a plan, but it worked. Ms. Rivlin, Mr. Mayor, and Ed, are African Americans here right to worry that they are losing population, losing political influence, and losing economic opportunity in the city of Washington?
Can I start?
Okay.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
what was I don't like
Straight into the
whispers,
mic.
what
No,
was
no.
that?
It's just that you need to talk straight into the mic.
Oh,
Yeah,
these are directional mics, and the closer you get, the worse you sound, but they have to hear you.
Okay.
Anyway, any of you may take that.
Well, let me just start. This is still a very diverse city. It has gone from a slight African American majority to African Americans being not quite a majority, but still a very large population group. And we have more Hispanics and more people from all parts of the world than we had. I remember when somebody who was very pompous about his knowledge of the political scene in Washington said to me, you know, Tony Williams is going to be the last black mayor. And I said, I didn't think so. And he said, you're crazy. Well, if you haven't noticed, it hasn't happened.
To David Catania's chagrin.
Perhaps.
Mr. Mayor, the racial aspect, you a lot of people, when you tried to move UDC in your early years, I mean, a lot of people thought you weren't doing things for African Americans, and people do feel put upon with gentrification.
Yeah, but I worried about that a little bit, but I have been worried about it over the years. I actually think in my own way. No one did more to generate the resources and deploy those resources, harvest those resources for the benefit of all our communities than I did in investments east of the river in all of our neighborhoods, getting the economy going. So I really don't stand back for anyone. At the same time, I'm the first to recognize that while we made a lot of first steps, we have a long way to go. A great example is, I learned working in Boston for a place called the Boston Redevelopment Authority. We had a program called Linkage, where we tried to say for every development downtown of over, I forget what it was, let's say 300,000 square feet, $5 a foot had to go to housing and $1 a foot had to go to jobs. That's where I got this notion of trying to link government buildings and investment to the neighborhoods, and where we got talking to a number of people, the idea of creating the Housing Production Trust Fund. So you take the recordation tax, where all this real estate was being churning in the economy there in the early 21st century, and take that and use it for housing investment. And I think we have to build on that.
Yeah.
The money that we basically deployed for rebuilding all of our schools, where'd that money come from? It didn't come from outer space. It came from this economy that allowed us to build the schools, to build the libraries, a lot of good things, but still a long way to go.
And I would add, just to build on what Mayor Wilman said, that indeed the growth in the city, the growth in the population, and the increase in college-educated residents has been a boon. It has given the city the resources that it needs to do things like rebuild the schools and in parks and libraries and provide record levels of affordable housing. But I think the statistics also do give rise for concern of whether we're actually doing enough. We're spending a record level on affordable housing, but it's still just 3% of the budget, and it feels like in many years we're just barely keeping up with the loss of affordable housing.
What percent?
It's 3%. Yeah. And your packet includes some research that we did to prepare for today. And one of the charts that is troubling to me is that while we have more white residents and fewer black residents, but that particularly concerned that the black residents born and raised in the district have seen their incomes not stay flat, but actually fall. So while the rest of the city is growing, the median income for black residents who are born and raised in the district is falling. So I think going back to your original question, I am concerned. I think we've done a lot as a city as we've grown more prosperous to invest in things that help families, but I feel like we also need to do more.
I think
This is a conversation, we're not going to wait for each person to be called on. They will speak as they like.
I think the division to focus on is the income division, not the racial division. This is a very divided city by income, with a weak middle class. It's stronger than it was, but the poverty numbers, as these excellent charts show, are not encouraging. And gentrification has made it very difficult for low-income people. It isn't so much black people as people who don't have the resources to afford the very expensive housing in the city.
I think, one of the things that I, certainly talked to Ed about, and I give him kudos too, because he really, in the Fiscal Policy Institute, while we disagree on sometimes the scope and the extent and the range of, the initiatives, they're certainly pointed in the right place, and they're a destination where we all want to go. But one thing we always have to keep in mind, when I was CFO during the evil control board period, I went over to Brookings, and I talked to this guy who Alice knows very well, Bob Reischauer, who was a fellow there, and he had been running the Congressional Budget Office after Alice. And, he told me something that really stuck with me, was that, when you're a city, you've got to be very, very careful about the range of what you can do with your finances, with your balance sheet. So while the ambitions and our aspirations may be here, in the real world economy, they may be short of that. While we may feel responsible for everything that's happening in the city, and we should, I think it's a good impulse to feel responsible for it, the national economy plays a role as well. So let's take inequality, for example. Are there things that have happened over the last 10, 15 years that have contributed to inequality in the city from local impulses and initiatives? I wouldn't doubt that for a second. Certainly they have. But in case anyone's noticed, the inequality in the national economy globally has increased as well. So, trying to address these things it's tortuous, and there's no easy answer. It's what can you do with the resources you have, and where do you draw the line? Very, very difficult. Easier said than done.
Ed, could you talk about the city's policies of affordable housing, set aside 10, 20, 30% for housing? It seems to be not nearly enough. Even in New York, Mayor de Blasio is being attacked for not doing more about housing. And someone said that, I'm trying to find my note of what they said about him, nice note, that they were just shoving a few affordable apartments stuffed in here and there. It's not a housing policy.
Yeah. Well, as I said in my opening remarks, I think we're fortunate in that we actually have the right tools to address our affordable housing challenges, and really it was from the policies promoted by Mayor Williams and Alice in the task force from the 2006. And the question really is, do we have the resources? And I've been doing this work for 15 years, in case you hadn't heard. And
we're going to charge you the next time you say it.
And one thing that I've noticed in this work is that when there is the will, when you hear from enough people that things are important, things can change. So, for example, about 10 years ago, there was a strong recognition that our schools were just in really terrible shape physically, and a really strong movement to fix those schools. And over a period of just a couple years, the city went from spending $100 million every year to rebuild its schools to, I believe, over $200 million. It was just a dramatic change. It wasn't the normal incremental change in the budget that happens from year to year. It was sort of a seismic shift in response to a real need. And I feel like that's the point where we need to be on affordable housing. We have increased what we're spending on affordable housing, but for example, this year, what was in the budget will create about 1,000 new affordable homes, when we think there are a need for over 20,000. So, and we know that housing costs are only going up. We know there's no low-cost housing in the private market, and really the only way that we're going to help low and moderate income people stay, the people who work jobs in retail, even people who work for the government in low-paid jobs, that those people aren't going to be able to stay unless we have a seismic shift like we do with schools on affordable housing.
But also, when you're talking about housing and resources that go to housing, you're talking about the cost of housing. One thing to consider, which I don't know if I would have brought this up when I was in office, I can do it now, is, we have to consider the cost of regulation. When I was in school, they were talking about the cost of regulation. I thought it was like this fascist thing, the cost of regulation. Then you get in office, start trying to run a government, there is a cost to regulation, right? So, for example, we say we want and we have a need to create more housing. Part of providing for that need is provide more funding, but part of it is perhaps addressing stuff like, we say we want more housing, but we don't want more density in the city. We want more housing, but we don't want to do anything with a height limit. We want to, we got to think about these things because they're,
Can I make...
Anytime.
Oops.
You can chair the meeting if you'd like.
No, I just want to make a sort of a fundamental point that we are incredibly fortunate in this city as cities go. We are not Baltimore. We are not Detroit. And we are not a lot of other cities that are really struggling. We have the resources. We can do it right. If you're in charge of Detroit, it's hard to know what to do. If you're in charge here, you've got a lot of resources. We can make this place a lot better than it is.
You mentioned gentrification. On the Kojo show yesterday, Andy Shaw was on, the owner of Bus Boys and Poets, and he was on with Shyla Poindexter Moore. I think I said her first name correctly. Andy's opening a Bus Boy and Poets in Anacostia, right on Martin Luther King, right where Good Hope Road is, right near the 11th Street Bridge that you rebuilt. He was, I want to use the word viciously, Andy was, a very progressive guy, if you know anything about him, for opening his restaurant in that community. He said, I'm bringing jobs, training, opportunity, all of that. And Shyla was saying, but none of us who live here have any stake in your business. Why can't we have a nonprofit over here where the residents can be the owners of the restaurant and open it? No one gives us the money, the startup funds. Andy pointed out he's never gotten a dime, he says, from city government. But she was passionate about the idea that his restaurant is one thing, And he might be a good landlord, he might be a good employer, and he might help people rise in the system. But the next door that opens next door might be something else, and then something else. And then the people who live there won't be able to afford, the rents will go up. That's the gentrification that's now starting to happen in Anacostia. Some people even say the Bridge Park. Have you heard about the Bridge Park? The old 11th Street Bridge will be like the High Line in New York. And some people are saying that that's going to be the freeway for whites on bikes to go to Well, I actually said it, but but to go to Anacostia and put pressure on the people who are there. And so that's something where there should be something maybe more for the city to do.
That's the thing with the bridge, and I got to be honest with you. My thing with the bridge is, you know,
Are we talking about the pedestrian bridge or the 11th?
I'm talking about the 11th Street Bridge with a new park on it and all that.
Well, the 11th Street did take all the commuter traffic off of that area, so that was a great thing.
But if I could make my point,
No, now you can.
we go way back. But anyway, I think I'll put it in the positive. It's while we're talking about the 11th Street Bridge, there's actually a whole Anacostia Park that serves the people of Anacostia. If we're going to be spending all this money, why aren't we spending the money on the actual Anacostia Park and revitalizing Anacostia Park? That's my point.
That's where you went canoeing early on.
Everybody was expecting me to turn over.
Yeah, we were all disappointed you didn't. You were very good. But it's a serious, I mean, Andy was a little bit taken aback because he's a progressive, and he made that famous remark when he ran for mayor, I think 2014. He was in Southeast Washington on the other side of the river, and he said all those damn cranes across the river look different when you look at them from the Anacostia side.
But you can't take the quote-unquote community. You know, I could take you to so many different places east of the river where people are saying, we want a sit-down restaurant, we want a sit-down restaurant. Hundreds of meetings, and I didn't hear one meeting where people were saying, we want a sit-down restaurant, and there are other requirements. Obviously, if we can get the sit-down restaurant and you can meet these other requirements, that's great, but you can't let good be the enemy, perfect be the enemy of the good, to use the cliche.
So Tom, I didn't hear the show, sorry, but
I wasn't on it.
what's that?
I wasn't on it.
You weren't on it, okay.
I was
Then I
listening.
don't need to apologize. So I don't know exactly what the concern is, but I certainly have a sense that in low-income communities where development is coming, they're excited that there's new development, new amenities, and things might be improving, but also a concern of what that means, what's happening next. What's going to happen to rents a year from now? Will I be able to stay? I've even heard of communities being concerned of tree planting in their neighborhood because they're concerned that that is just a start of development that's going to displace them. And I think one of the lessons that I've noticed in the last 15 years, if you think about where development has occurred in the city, a huge amount of it is along the Green Line, right? Columbia Heights, Petworth, U Street. And we probably all should have recognized 15 years ago that opening up the metro was going to create a node of development and was going to create demand for housing. And if we had forethought then to preserve affordable housing nearby, then maybe we would have had more mixed income communities. And it's what people are talking about with the 11th Street Bridge Park. We know the park's going to come 2 or 3 years down the road. If we can take time now to preserve the affordable housing that's east of the Anacostia River there, invest now before it gets too expensive, then families can stay and they won't be concerned about displacement.
It's important I think the first line is to preserve the affordable housing you have, right?
Yeah.
Right, rather than building new affordable housing. First line of defense, preserve the affordable housing you have and really putting and committing the time and resources to do that. So we did one project where we preserve a multi-family project up in Columbia Heights. It was successful. It's an enormous amount of work, right? That's the nature of housing. All of you people in housing know housing's very time-consuming and complicated, but you got to do it.
Anita Bonds, who's chairman of the Housing Committee, told me that there are something like 40 different properties of varying sizes that all qualify for Section 8 housing, which is the federal program subsidized rent. And she says, I don't remember the exact number, but a substantial number of those 40 are giving 1-year notices that they're going to get out of the program. And if they get out of the program, they can do market rate housing.
And
That's where you've got to step in and preserve, right?
That's where the city can step in
And better manage.
What does step in mean? Do what?
It means like I wish I had the name of the project, but it was a multifamily project on 14th Street there. So they're getting ready to flip the project. The city, you use your influence with HUD to get the owner to negotiate, and that's what I mean by stepping in, redo the contract to preserve the affordability. And there are a lot of different ways to do that, as those of you who are involved in housing know, but that's what you got to do. And the other thing is, this is like the flip side of the problem we face. You know, you talk about 100,000 residents. I remember, and Greg remembers, we'd go to some of these mayoral events, and Tom would be there grumbling, I can't believe I'm covering this, right? Anyway,
I've heard it.
right, where we were like tearing down an abandoned house where, you know, because we were stabilizing the neighborhood. I mean, we have the exact flip side of that problem now. So, for example, 20 years ago, you were trying to essentially create a floor under the prices. Now, we're trying to create a ceiling on the prices. How do you do that in an economically feasible way that's politically defensible? You know, one thing that Brookings is spending a lot of time on, and we at the Federal City Council, while we're not busy with the plot to take over the city, have been invested in that's a joke, is
It's already happened,
right.
so you don't have to do it anymore.
But no, is working on this notion of public wealth. You know, there's a bad way to do public-private partnerships and to talk about financing public assets, and there's a good way to do it. And how can we use, some modern financial techniques to try to do neighborhood revitalizations that get at what we're talking about? How do we do them to preserve and expand affordable housing? How do we do them and try to promote the educational agenda as well, like by linking educational improvement to actual neighborhood improvement?
Ed, do you know Alyssa Silverman, a large council member, has proposed a bill with some council members supporting it to step up the city's ability to subsidize residents who want to buy their apartments. Do you know about that bill enough to talk about it?
I don't
Good.
know. I don't know
Good.
that I do, but I would say that, and I think building on the conversation we've had, that we are fortunate in the district that we have financial resources and policies that are there to help people. So we have a law that allows tenants to buy their buildings when it goes up for sale, and we also have the right as the city government to step in and buy a building that if it's a subsidized project where the owner is considering converting to market rate, the city can actually step in. It hasn't used this authority yet, but the city can buy the building, put in the resources needed to fix it up, and then either turn it over to the tenants to let them buy it, or turn it over perhaps to a nonprofit to help them manage it. And those are the kind of things that I think we need to preserve affordable housing. We also have a law that was passed just a couple of years ago that the DC Fiscal Policy Institute and DC Appleseed and Coalition for Smarter Growth promoted that said whenever the city has land that it turns over for affordable housing, that land should for housing, that should include affordable housing. And so there's going to be 300-unit apartment building at 10th and Florida Avenue Northwest, sort of the heart of the U Street area, where rents are incredibly expensive, but 100 of those apartments are going to be affordable for the lifetime of the building because of this law. And so that's an example of the kind of thing that I think we need to keep doing more of.
And what can you just say roughly, what does affordable mean?
That is a very good question. So affordable is spending no more than a third of your income on housing, but then the question is affordable to whom and at what income level. And housing programs are targeted at different income levels. And what we know from our research is that, and not so surprisingly, that the families with the lowest incomes are the ones who are most likely to have affordable housing problems. And those are families at 30% of area median income, which is about $30,000 for a family of four. So in the work that we do, we certainly try to prioritize as much affordable housing programs to target those families.
Well, there are two sides of affordability. There's affordability by controlling the price. There's affordability by trying to address the income levels of families in the housing. And one of the things that we're looking at is, with some of you, is bus rapid transit. You know, I'm proud to have been involved in the now notorious streetcar with Dan Tangerlini. But when you really think of it and you look at the best literature out there, while there's an argument for streetcars, the most cost-effective way to move people, it's not glamorous, but it's very effective, is bus rapid transit. And when you look at all the literature that really correlates very strongly, Carol knows this, high, intense poverty with lack of transportation, it really speaks dramatically to the need in our city and in our region to really look at bus rapid transit to connect our people to where the jobs are.
Would you, both of you, would you be for or against moving the streetcar to Georgetown, and do you like the gondola idea? I want the gondola done just so I can ride it once, but What about the streetcar? I mean, that seems like a great deal of disruption of the middle of town for something that maybe rapid bus service could do better.
I've never been a streetcar fan. I always thought that that was a lot of disruption, and though it has a certain fan base of people who somehow think that it's more glamorous to ride a streetcar than a bus, it's really not very cost effective. Once we did it, I think we have to make it work, but the other thing that ought to be said every time there's a public meeting on anything is we should never have let Metro deteriorate the way it did, and we got to fix it.
Yeah, that's where I want to actually go back. We jumped so far quickly into some current issues. I want a little history, if you could, about how the control board, the financial authority, didn't go away. It's in dormant? What's the right word? It's dormant. It's not gone, but it's dormant unless the city screws up its finances again. But how did you make that change from? I think you were the chair at the time.
Yes.
When you turned it went out of business, and was there anything about that turnover that you could tell us that you couldn't have told us then?
No, but there was a very nice moment, and I'm sure Tony remembers, at his first inauguration. We had decided that when we got Tony and had an elected mayor again who seemed competent to run the city, that we would turn over the authority that we had at the control board to the newly elected mayor. We retained some backup authority under the statute, but we said, dear Tony, you've got to run this city. And so we had a memorandum of understanding, and we worked on it together. And Tony couldn't sign it until he actually was mayor. I could, because I was control board chair. So we drafted it together, I signed it, and then the minute he took the oath of office, I was sitting in the middle of the audience, and I raised this paper and walked down the aisle, and Tony signed it, and that was how the transition happened.
Did you have to vote on the control board to do that, or was that just a dictatorial decision by you?
Oh, we had to vote.
But kudos, everybody knows, in addition to my job as president of the Alice Rivlin fan club, I also do duty in the Linda Kropp fan club.
Hear, hear.
I think Linda Kropp was a fabulous chairman of our council. And, Nat, who, we all love, Nat talks about how we had all these balanced budgets, CFO is great. But fact of the matter is, the council never passed or even proposed an imbalanced budget. Not to take anything away from the CFO, but Linda did a fabulous job in many ways, including as fiscal steward in her legislative capacity.
She probably has gotten the least amount of credit
Absolutely
from this
right.
a very arduous time.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
let me add my voice to that.
I want to talk about two things. I think I hate the words budget autonomy, but this is a current issue. The city says it has passed a referendum and it's gotten Superior Court approval to not send the budget to the local funds to Congress except for a 30-day review period rather than making it part of the federal budget like the Agriculture Department, Defense Department. Ms. Rivlin is the former Congressional Budget Office person. Is the city right about this? I know the Republicans are trying to pass legislation to stop it and make the city submit the entire budget through the federal appropriations process. But is the city right that it has the authority to do this?
Yes, I think so. In fact, it was done in an orderly way. The council passed it. There was a referendum, and the Congress, under the law as I understand it, Tony can correct me, had 60 days to disapprove it, and they didn't. So it is the law of the land, and it's the right thing. We ought to be able to spend our own resources that we raise right here. And so I think we're absolutely in the right, although the efforts of the Congress to undo it I find dismaying, and I've been driven to much more enthusiastic support of statehood by this situation. I don't see how we're going to get out of this until we actually do statehood.
But how do I say this politely?
Don't.
When I went up to Congress and dealt with all the various leaders on one level, and then, you advocated full representation, self-determination, state and autonomy on another level, it could work because even with the Gingrich Republicans, while they were severe conservatives, there was a consistency and a rationality, if I may dare say. Now, I went up to testify about the Puerto Rico situation, and I was really aghast because there's a far, far right wing of the party, the Tea Party people, that don't even support a control board in Puerto Rico. I don't know what they support. And one guy's talking about, well, they could solve their problem with more cruise ships. It's unbelievable. So our city leadership now, I think Gregory would agree, it's a higher challenge now because you don't have conservatives who are at least, I just, you know what I mean.
Where the sides aren't talking to each other.
That's just,
What about that, Ed? The budget autonomy, some people think that the city stepped beyond its, even with the Superior Court ruling, that the court ruling basically said, well, that was then, this is now, and you can make the change. They've done the change, and Paul Ryan even has said, we're not going to allow it to go forward.
Yes. Well, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm in the Walter Smith fan club, and I know that he is one, and that it was DCFPI that was a big champion of the budget autonomy legislation. It is the law, and the courts have said it's fine, and I think whatever we can do as a city to assert our right for budget autonomy, particularly so that the Congress can't stop things that we have decided to do, whether it's legalize marijuana or help low-income women make choices over their parenting, I think we should have the right to do that. So I just applaud whatever progress we can make towards budget autonomy.
President Obama's White House has said that he will seriously consider vetoing the legislation if it makes it to the White House. It still has to pass the Senate. Ms. Rivlin, is there any hope that it might be stopped there?
I don't know. I don't think it's likely to get to the president's desk. He certainly will veto it. But a Trump presidency might be a different thing.
Okay. Well, I want to remind you, if you have questions, we're going to start taking them in a few minutes, and you'll have to come over here because when you ask the question, you're going to have a microphone, and the camera's going to swing over there and take your picture. So, but let's go to an easy subject, the one the mayor likes a lot. Ed, the Fiscal Policy Institute has lobbied for more and smarter spending on public policy to benefit the moderate and low end of the economic scale here. You say things are much better and much more needs to be done. So let's talk sports and entertainment. I knew you would like this. The Fiscal Policy Institute, I meant to bring the document because I still have it, opposed spending on the Nats ballpark, arguing money was and is needed elsewhere. The longtime community group Committee of 100 and others opposed the new convention center before this time for its cost and its neighborhood disruption. Many groups opposed the Verizon Center, too big for that small site. Ward 2 Councilmember Jack Evans, who backed all three of these projects against strong opposition, likes to say without the ballpark, convention center, and Verizon Center, the district today would be Detroit. The city and the soccer team now have broken ground for a new $300 million soccer stadium, and every mayor since Tony Williams has supported the Skins returning to the city at RFK with the provision that the team pays for any new stadium. Where does sports and entertainment fit, Ed, as you try to get more money for the needs that you see in the city?
So I guess I would, I would add a clarification that when the baseball stadium was being considered, our position and the position of our coalition was that it should be a shared expense between the team and the city. I think we were asking for a 50-50 split, and that it was temporarily what the council supported. And we did that in part because we know that there are stadiums across the country that just typically don't get built without some public subsidy. And of course, there is a cultural value, right? The district has changed since the Nationals have been here. It has added a lot of excitement for DC residents and the region. But what we would argue is it's a cultural benefit, not an economic benefit. There are just stacks of research that I could bring that are taller than this table that show that paying for stadiums isn't good if the goal is economic development. That if you want economic development, it's much better to invest in the people of the city, in things like schools and transportation and housing. And in fact, I think a lot of what we've seen over the last 15 years with the renovation of schools and more libraries and improvements in parks and recreation centers and charter schools, those are the things that have helped the city grow and retain its population, not a baseball stadium.
The team says that 60% of its fan base comes from Virginia, and that's discretionary money that would not have been spent in the district otherwise. Your response?
Yes. Well, certainly.
Well, actually, then we had the mayor because this was his idea.
Yeah. So, and again, from a revenue perspective, all of the money that's spent at the stadium that and all the tax revenues are currently being used just to pay off the stadium. So those aren't actually benefiting the city's coffers. And again, I think to the extent that we're trying to grow the city's economy and make it stronger, the $700 million that was spent on the stadium could have been spent in other ways that probably could have achieved similar or better results.
And before we hear from them, prospectively, the skins, if we work out the name issue and work out the who pays for what do you think about that? The council member up there, Charles Allen, is opposed to a football stadium anywhere up there.
I mean, a football stadium is used 8 times a year, I think, right? Or maybe a few more if there are special events. So to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on something that brings residents out or brings even people from the suburbs in for 8 times a year just doesn't seem to me the best for thinking about really return on investment and smart investments. So if the football team wants to be in Washington, I would just encourage them to pay for the stadium.
What about the economics of the sports and entertainment?
I would be more positive in this sense. There are a lot of studies, and the ones in cities like Detroit and Cleveland that weren't doing well anyway have shown that just having a stadium doesn't turn it around. In cities like this one and San Francisco and a couple of others, where you have a lot of potential for development, and a baseball stadium, which is used a lot, can be part of it. I think there's evidence that ours was built at a moment when the economy was sliding into a huge recession, and the development didn't come right away, but it sure has.
Mr. Mayor, this is your baby, the baseball ballpark.
Yeah, I mean, somebody called me from the council and said the only people complaining about the delay in building the stadium are from out of town, and that's my point. The people paying for the stadium, and it's being paid for ahead of schedule. As a matter of fact, opponents of the stadium use the prepayment, if you will, of the debt, which was sunk in a fund to actually patch up the budget deficit in some of the years back. So it's actually being paid for itself ahead of schedule. And I think the city, I would agree with Alice, all the cities aren't the same. Like Professor Zimbalist, who has written a lot about this, if you have a city that's struggling and you have the stadium in place A and you move it to place B in the same city, yeah, you're not going to get a lot of effect. But if you have a city ripe for other development around the stadium and you're importing that tax into the city, I think that's a important distinction. But I think it's important to be agnostic on all these things and to look at talk about creating a streetcar. I think it is important to rethink all these things and each transaction, right?
And the football team?
I think if you ask most people, not us, for example, but I guarantee you if we went to a lot of places in the city where you could argue there are other needs that they need to be addressing, and you said we could bring the Redskins back, I think the name should be changed, which I can use the name for right now, bring the Redskins back to the city, all for it. We're going to have to pay for it, all for it. Might mean we can't do some other things, all for it. I think that's the reaction you're getting a lot of the city.
That development area up there is almost 200 acres. The neighbors who live up there particularly say they want parks for their children, they want retail. Is it possible to have all the things that the residents want?
Yeah, I don't think they're mutually exclusive, because if you did, and also, here's another thing, I got to make this point. Everybody talking about the baseball stadium is going to take away money from the schools. And guess what? We built the thing, and then we went ahead with $1.5 billion we already had in place for the school. So there wasn't an opportunity cost as to school reconstruction. But to get to the stadium, one of the things that's changing with all these complexes is the ratio of parking spaces to attendance is constantly getting better if you're an environmentalist. So while you needed acres and acres of parking for your old stadiums, you don't need that. You don't need that parking anymore. The last thing, and to think about, again, we can disagree on different transactions and different stadia or venues, but an important point to remember is that the tourism economy is a big part of the district's revenue base. It's really by a lot of professional people underperforming, so it could actually be doing even better than it's doing. For example, if we got the federal government to actually help us do events as opposed to getting in the way of doing events, that's just one example. But I mentioned the tourism economy because the tourism economy is a powerful economy in providing the road to work for a lot of the people that we're talking about, right? So you can start working in a hotel, you start an entry-level job, you can continue in that hotel and end up in an executive position. So we need, you'll listen to a lot of people like Steve Fuller, who I think is a great economist and everything. He'll talk about how we need to bring more good jobs to our region, and that's true. But especially for our region, and particularly DC, we need to look at economic opportunities that also provide this pathway into the world of work, like tourism.
And one of the aspects of the stadium is there's discussions with the Wizards ownership is to build a new arena adjacent to the football stadium if the Redskins were to come back.
Not a good idea.
He said not a good idea if you heard that. And Jack Evans, who represents that area, said he doesn't want the team to move. But can it be an economic success without taking away from the issues that your group feels so passionately about?
It's like 20th century zoning. In 20th century zoning, you had this use here, and this use here, and this use here, and this use here. 21st century, you want to get away from that. You want mixed uses, and the city is a vital, vibrant system. I don't want to sound like Obi-Wan Kenobi, but the city's like a force and a thing, and you can't kill it by trying to overly manage it.
And we're going to take questions, and as people will come up, we'll take them. I would like to ask Ms. Rivlin, throughout your work, as I looked at it, you've supported a commuter tax, a fairness that all other states get to tax income at its source. I checked with the DC CFO's office, and they said it was, when you first discussed this, 70% of the jobs in the District of Columbia were held by people who did not live here. The CFO now tells me that that's actually down under 60% now and dropping, which is a good thing. But Maryland and Virginia still benefit from taxing the people who work in our city but live in their states to the tune of well over $1 billion, maybe $2 billion now. Could we not get Congress to stop subsidizing Maryland and Virginia and allow us to have our own tax structure, and we could lower taxes?
Tom, you and I have been having this conversation for, 30 years?
About 30.
I am in favor, and I actually said earlier, one thing statehood would buy us is the right that all states have to tax income earned by non-residents. I don't call it a commuter tax. I call it a non-resident income tax.
A non-resident income tax.
And
the media is going to call it a commuter tax to the end of the earth.
Well, that's the way the media is. We ought to have that right. But you're absolutely right that it is Maryland and Virginia who benefit from our not having this right. They're going to fight. And there are other possibilities. You could compensate Maryland and Virginia. You could
share the tax.
You could share the tax. But it's still important, and I think it is one of the arguments for statehood, but not the most important one. The most important one is self-determination.
Any comment on the commuter tax?
Yeah, the argument that I used yesterday in talking to some statehood people was the argument you have to make, that I would make to Maryland and Virginia is, whether you like it or not, and obviously there's a lot of people in our country who don't like it, we're in a global economy, okay? And competing in the global economy now are metropolitan areas that, in our case, really extend from Baltimore all the way to Richmond. And Northern Virginia is an important generator for Virginia and their state and their economy, and certainly the area around us, Prince George's, Montgomery, important for Maryland. The argument you got to make is that Maryland, Virginia, on this global stage, you're going to get much more from having two DC senators vying for our region than you're going to lose by the impact on your budget of the commuter tax in DC. Come on, let's get with the 21st century.
But there'll be Democratic senators and.
That's the problem, but I think you need to make the argument, though, on this economy.
Before we go to the questions, you have to come out from behind the column, the curtain, whatever it is. Do we have a microphone for them?
Yeah.
Okay.
The district has gained 100,000 residents in this period. My question is, going forward, what's your projection, guesstimate, of how many more the district can bring in or take on, absorb without raising the height limit?
Well, there's a study that says it's going to be 900 and nearly 1 million people by 2032, I think is the number. What's the answer?
Remember, it once was. At the end of World War II, we had 1 million people in the district.
Oh, it was 1 million? I thought it was
Yep.
800. Okay.
And briefly, I think a lot of them were soldiers in barracks and stuff like that. But there was a moment when we had 1 million people. I don't have a projection. I expect the population to go up. I don't think it's necessary to change the height limit, but that's just sort of my own romanticism, I think.
What about changing, not the height limit in the center of the tourism of the city, but out New York Avenue where there's lots of railroad space to build over, like we're building over the 3rd Street Tunnel and other places? Why not on the...
Some parts of Paris have a higher limit than the interior of Paris.
Yeah. It's pretty far out.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, they can't hear you.
Parts of Paris, like the ugly La Défense, right?
Right.
Have a higher height limit than the interior core of Paris. So there are models for differentiating in the height limit. I would agree, in the core of the city, we want to keep it low. But as you get out to other parts of the city, you could have a higher limit at higher density.
Ed?
I mean, it's pretty clear the city's a very popular place to live, and there will be more people who want to live in the city, and I don't know exactly how we'll get to accommodate them. But for me, the biggest concern is we already know that in the last 15 years, we added 100,000 people, and without adding quite enough housing to accommodate all of them, which is why our housing prices went up. And it seems that that's likely to continue, that we won't be able to build enough housing to keep up with the demand. So we're going to have this continued pressure on affordable housing. So I may sound like I'm returning to the same note, but I would just want to make sure that as those people come to the city, we're just taking as much of that resources that we're gaining from those, from the additional population to make sure that we're preserving affordable housing for the people who want to stay, so that we're actually growing our population, not displacing existing
I would agree with that,
residents.
because if you took your hands off the controls, I think in 20, 30 years, Washington, D.C. be like a European city. Everybody in the city be doing fine, and inner ring would be struggling.
A European city, exactly. Thank you for that question. Next, please.
In terms of the tools that DC has to create more affordable housing, DOFA, and it's not, as it's not being used very much. So my question is, in addition to stating that it's not being used very much, what would motivate the city to use it more, to create more affordable housing? That's part of the question. Another part is, what is needed to sustain affordable housing? Not just a roof over your head, but how do you in fact retain your affordable housing? It seems to me that it requires training, it requires an education system that does not, that graduates more than, what is it now, is it up to 60% of high school students? I think that's generous in what is.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, thank you.
You may have heard the word DOPA and didn't necessarily know, or acronym, didn't know. I mean, that's the district.
It's not the marijuana law.
It is not. It is
Not
the
too
District
bad.
Opportunity to Purchase Act, which I had referred to earlier, which is the district's ability to buy buildings before when they go up for sale and preserve them as affordable housing. And I really think that we do know that there is progress being made. The Mayor Bowser put together a strike force, she called it, on preserving affordable housing and taking advantage of that. And really, I think it's just a matter of, do we have the will as a community to to move forward with that, to make sure that the mayor knows this is an important thing to move forward with and that we all care about it. And then once that housing is built, you talked about retaining, and I don't know if this is exactly what you meant, but we want to make sure that when the city invests in affordable housing, that it's kept affordable for the lifetime of the building. Part of the reason that we have the crisis that we have is a number of buildings were built with subsidies from the federal government or local government, but then those subsidies expire, and that's when we risk losing all this affordable housing. So as we build more, we just need to make sure that it's going to be there forever.
And it's maintained.
And it's maintained.
But what we know now over the last 20 years that we didn't know, and we didn't know it because it wasn't working, was we know now that you can have mixed income housing and it's successful. So you go to a lot of the Hope 6 projects and you look at the housing, one's market rate, one's affordable, one's low income. You can't really tell which unit is which. So we've learned a lot about how to do that. So we really need neighborhood stabilization projects that use the kind of resources and wealth the city has to internally subsidize the strategy. So as you're stabilizing, revitalizing the neighborhood, you're providing for preserving some of the housing, building new housing, using an array of different things to provide that housing. We've learned a lot about how to do neighborhoods right by doing a lot of them wrong, and we need to pick up on it now. And I applaud the mayor for her, the council's weighed in and made some adjustments to it, as is their right. And but I mean, to step in and address what a number of mayors, I'm sure we all applaud. The horror at DC General is, I think, to her credit.
There have been such great strides in the city, and there's such wonderful changes, but for whom? You said there are 100,000 new residents. I think there have to be at least 200 or 300,000, because I can name 100,000 people who have left the city since I've been here. I live on Capitol Hill, and 90% of the people that lived in my neighborhood back then are no longer here to see all the great strides, to see how, what things look like. I've been around 40 years and have seen the changes. I know its neighborhood has changed tremendously in the time that he's been there. We're making great strides, but the question is for whom? Because the old Washingtonians are being forced out. I don't even know of the people that are in here, or that are living in Washington. I'd like to know how many of them are really long-time residents, the families that were here for 50 or 100 years.
Do you have a specific question for the panel? Your preamble is up.
Yes, for who are we building houses?
All right, good.
Who are we
All right.
for?
Okay, thank you.
Well, let me just make the simple point that the questioner is absolutely right. The 100,000 was a net number. There are 100,000 more people living in the district than there were in 2000.
Right.
And that was, and the district has always attracted a lot of young people who come here and work for a while and then move out. They may move to the suburbs, they may move to some other city, but the idea of increasing the population was not to have 100,000 new people move in, but it was to increase the net population of the district in part by retaining people who would otherwise have moved out. And I think we've done some of that, but where we've failed, as the questioner points out, is to preserve enough affordable housing so that people who have low incomes and already lived here can stay.
One thing to think about is, and this isn't excusing it, but one way to think about this is we're able to do more now, and this is why this this discussion is important, because we have more resources. So
They can't hear you.
We got more resources. Some of the resources, if you were, is money. Some of the resources now is that the government is actually more responsive. You can actually say we want to do X, Y, Z, and there's a pretty good likelihood now that big parts of DC government will actually accomplish X, Y, Z. Again, not making excuses, but at least when I came in, it was not preordained that you would just say we're going to do ABC and the government would just swing right into action and do ABC. So part of this is us really ramping up the effort with better, it wasn't really the employees, it's training, equipment, opportunities, and good management to get the government to where it can actually accomplish things now. And I think we're in a better place now than we were.
We do have a lot of baby strollers in town. I've been trying to do a story about the stroller wars of trying to get into some restaurants. You can't get through the door. But, this city is talking about business. There's a proposal for the $15 minimum wage. The family leave is being discussed at this point. The council has passed legislation on part-time employees about scheduling them and how often they have to work and what they get paid if they are in fact working and if they're called in on short notice. Some of the business people in town complain that, well, any one of these might be good or some of them might be good. All of them together are anti-business. Thoughts?
So I'm glad you raised that, and I think it is in some ways an answer to the previous question that we've talked a lot this afternoon about affordable housing and preserving it, which is an important part of keeping the diversity in the city as we move forward. But clearly, we also need residents to have better incomes. And as the city has become more prosperous, I think it is time for us to think about thinking about what we can do to redistribute that make sure that economic benefits are widely shared is probably the right way to say it. So $15 minimum wage looks like that's likely to pass this year. The question of what's going to happen to restaurant workers, whether they also will get a $15 minimum wage, paid family leave program so that when people need to take time off to take care of themselves or an ill relative, that they'll be able to be paid and keep their job. We know that lots of people leave their jobs when they have an illness or an ill relative, and then they stay, and then they're not able to get their job back. So I think that's incredibly important. The other things that we focus on a lot at the DC Fiscal Policy Institute are education and training, which we haven't talked a whole lot about tonight, and maybe somebody will raise. But we know, for example, that a lot of what dictates a child's success in school is just what neighborhood they're in, the zip code, the average income in that neighborhood. And we've been working in recent years to make sure that schools in high poverty neighborhoods have more resources so they can address the educational and emotional and other needs of those children. And we feel like we need to continue making more progress and things like that.
I believe Kaya Henderson has made some steps in that direction, but I think you're talking about a lot more than what she's done.
Right. We are investing more in high poverty schools. We're working hard to make sure the money actually gets to those schools. There was a report came out just a few years ago recommending a certain amount added per student in high poverty neighborhoods, and we're not quite there. We've done some, but we haven't fully met the goal.
Ms. Rivlin, on the $15 minimum wage?
Well, as an economist, I'm just delighted that we're running a national experiment on this contentious subject. Seattle, California, New York, and probably Washington are going to try a $15 minimum wage, and I predict it's not going to do what the conservatives fear of suddenly throwing a lot of people out of work. I think we can absorb it, but there is a problem of doing too much too fast. Whether we do all of these things at once and is got to be thought through from a business perspective.
Okay, good. Question?
To Mayor Wynn's point that he just made about the ability to do more with the resources that are brought in and the taxes, it's sort of predicated upon the assumption that there's going to be this consistent consensus that existed 15 years ago about what to do with these resources. But the council looks a lot different than it did 15 years ago, as does the city. What are the risks that consensus about what we should do with enhanced resources and the plan of the city helping folks east of the river, helping folks who are struggling to get in the middle class is going to continue? And what are the risks that may fall apart?
I think whatever happens with the demographics of the city, income levels in the city, I think the risk, from my point of view, is that we actually keep swinging too far left, not that we end up we're not going to be Houston. I mean, it's, that's just the way I see it. I always felt that I may have been maladroit about it or inept about it, and my successors may have been, but I never got phone calls from folks in Northwest saying, oh, you're doing too much, you're spending too much money east of the river. They may have said you're incompetent, you don't know what you're doing. We have a citizenry in the district who believe in the noble purposes of government and believe that government can step in and do the right thing at the right time.
Could all this money, though, lead to more corruption? And we had 3 council members.
Yeah, you gotta be careful with that, absolutely, like the Children's Trust Fund.
Right.
Jesus.
We still don't know what happened there. But are these permanent improvements? I think Pepin was asking.
The assumption that because the district is more white, we're going to have more bad council people, I don't think that follows at all. I mean, Alyssa Silverman, for heaven's sakes, what are we talking about here? It doesn't follow that white people are bad people.
Well, I'm not sure it's totally racial, but the city is required now to have a balanced budget. Is that correct from the control board period of time? That's one of the requirements is you must have a balanced budget.
And it has to really be balanced because you need a multi-year financial plan, so you can really see whether it's really balanced or not. Anybody can balance a budget in 1 year.
Right.
So, in our experience in like engaging with the community in presentations or even through polling work we've done, we found that our interpretation, our sense is that the district's